Hey everyone, today we are going to go over some different watercolor techniques. So you'll start with a sheet like this and a watercolor pan. Some of them are new, some of them have been gently used. But to use watercolor, you start by adding water to your color. So the first thing we are going to do is we are going to make a value scale, which, if you can recall, a value scale is just when you make a steady gradation from dark to light or light to dark. I'm going to start with my darkest color here. And to control the value of your watercolor, there's going to be two main factors. One of them will be the amount of water you use and the amount of layering. So for this darkest color, I just used a little bit of water. And to make it lighter, I am going to add more water. As you can see, I'm using the bottom of my lid as kind of a palette for mixing. So I took some of my green and I added more water to it and mixed it up there. Right now these colors are really similar, but like I said, layering is the other way that allows us to make our colors a little bit darker. So I will go back and do some layering. To get my next lightest color, I have just added some more water to that spot that I have going on my lid. And then to get my next lightest color, I'll add a bit more water. And to get my very lightest color, it's going to be quite watery with just a little bit of my green tint in it. And now I'm going to go ahead and start adding some layers to any colors that might need to be a bit darker. And this works best if the first layer is already totally dry, so I like to give a little bit of wait time if I need it. And what we're going for here is just that smooth, steady gradation. And if you get a color too dark, you can use plain water to lift the color off your paper and make it a little bit lighter. Now let's get started with the rest of our techniques. This first one is called glazing, and glazing involves layering two colors together, but the first layer needs to be dry. So as you can see, I just painted half of that, and I'm going to come back to it once it is dry. Now let's move on to diffusing. What I'm doing here is I'm painting plain water on my paper, and then I'm taking some nice watery drops of color and dropping them onto the water. As you can see, it spreads out or diffuses. And I'm just using two colors here, but really you can use as many as you want. Keep in mind how our primaries mix together to make different colors if you want to make a secondary color. Next, I'm going to be doing blending. So blending is pretty much what it sounds like. I have some nice wet watercolor here, and I'm going to take a second color with lots of water, and you'll see that when I paint them right next to each other, those colors will naturally blend. That water really mixes together. So when two colors that are next to each other are wet, they're going to blend together in this way. Next, we have something called puddling. What I've done here is I have painted a squiggly line of water, and now I'm dripping some color onto that water. You'll notice that the color only stays within the boundaries of that water line that I painted. And now moving on to our next technique, we are going to be using salt. And this is just regular table salt. I'm going to paint a nice watery color. I want it to be very fluid, so there is lots of water and a lot of pigment at the same time. And now I'm going to sprinkle salt on top. You might be able to see it happen right away. You can see that the salt crystals kind of absorb the water around it, so they'll leave some light spots. Once it's dry, you can brush it off, but let it dry on top for now. Our sixth technique is going to be using rubbing alcohol. So again, I'm using a nice solid watery color here, and I have Q-tips, and I'll just drip some dots of rubbing alcohol onto my watercolor, and as you can see, it's kind of leaving this nice texture behind. This is happening because alcohol evaporates more quickly than water, so it is drying at a quicker pace. And for this next technique, I'm going to be using a straw and a puddle of watercolor. As you can see, I have a really watery kind of drop here, and I'm just using a straw to blow it in different directions. Please just make sure you do not share straws with one another. It is not very sanitary. And keep in mind that you can blend colors in this way too. And it's just a really fun kind of abstract way of using watercolor. Our next technique is going to be called lifting. And lifting is pretty much what it sounds like. We're going to be lifting color off the paper. So I have this nice, really solid black, but if you want it to be lighter, you can take a paper towel and absorb some of that to make a lighter color, and you can end up with a nice texture too if that's what you want. And our final technique is one called a crayon resist. I'm using a white crayon for it, but really you can use any color you want. And I've drawn a heart with that white crayon. And now I can paint a color right on top of it. And it might initially cover it up, but as it dries, that watercolor is not going to be able to fully dry correctly on top of the crayon. So whatever you have drawn will show through. If you want it to show even more, what I did is I just took some water and painted over the crayon to get rid of any color that might have been sitting on top. And now we're ready to go back and finish up our very first technique. So with glazing, since I let that first layer dry, you'll notice that the colors do not blend together in the same really fluid, watery way. You can end up with nice crisp lines and color changes in this way if that's what you want. And when you're finished, please make sure you dump your water, wash your brushes, and I also recommend if you are going to be closing your palette and you have done any mixing in the lid, make sure you take a paper towel and just soak that up. If you want to save any colors that you've mixed, you can just leave your watercolor tray open inside of your bin, and the colors will dry, but they will reactivate if you just add a little bit of water to it. Have fun!